Welcome to the Game or Die podcast. I am your host, Ryan Moore, and today we're going to be talking about all the games that I've been playing since the last episode. First, I want to talk about the last game that I was talking about in the last episode, which was Elden Ring. I talked a lot about it in the last episode, so I'm not going to bore everyone with all the details and everything like that, but I do want to talk about it just a little bit because I finished it. I actually finished Elden Ring in our Couch Money Discord. That was our game of the month for last month, and I was originally very against it because I hate Dark Souls games. I don't think they're very fun, but for some reason, Elden Ring really, really grabbed me. It was basically one of those games that I just gravitated towards, maybe because it was open world, maybe because I didn't feel like I was locked into get through this area. There's only really one way to get through it, and you just have to bang your head against a wall over and over and dying over and over and over and over again. With Elden Ring, because it's open world, you are able to go to a different area, do something else. If you are struggling with something like a boss, like there was a boss that I talked about, Margit the Fell Omen, which is like the first main boss of the game, which I don't even think is really the first main boss. Like that's what a lot of people say. But it does gate your progress in a way, but it gates your progress like 40 or 50 hours into the technical game if you want to start beating story missions type stuff. But if you just want to play, I'd say at least 70% of the game, you don't have to fight that guy. But when I did, I came across him very early on in the game, within the first several hours of the game. And I put in maybe 2.5 hours into fighting this character over and over and over again, and I never felt powerful. But once I realized, you could go somewhere else. You can go to a different area. Instead of going forward, go backwards, go south of the map. And there's so much more. And I leveled up and I got more powerful. I got better weapons. That took a while to kind of understand because I'm not well versed in those games. But once I did, I had such an enjoyable time with the game. I could not believe that I put 95 hours into that game in a single month, which is really unheard of for me. I mostly don't have that type of time for games. Luckily, my wife was out of town for a little bit, especially in the very beginning, several dozen or so hours of that game. And then I would just sit there and play it, morning, noon, and night, whenever I had free time that I didn't have to do something else. Man, I was dedicated to playing that game, and it was really, really, really fun. Now, I will say with the last quarter, not even quarter, maybe about the last section of the game is a better phrase of saying it, but once you burn the Erd tree, which is kind of one of the main things in the game, like you have this big, gigantic, overbearing world tree that life is all connected to or something. I don't know. The story is nonsensical, and it's really the worst part of the game is the story. I couldn't care less about any of these characters. I have no idea who's who, what they're doing, what their motivations are, what their names are half of the time. It's just, there's this guy. Oh, it's the sledgehammer guy. Oh, it's this guy. There are a couple standout characters for sure, but I could not get into them. The game with those From Software games, I think they do an absolutely terrible job. And this is by design. This is what a lot of people really like about these games is they think that, here is a game that doesn't hold your hand. Doesn't hold your hand is like the loosest term that you could possibly define for these games. They don't tell you a darn thing about them. They don't tell you anything about what's going on in the world, where to go, what to do, how to do it. And that's the key issue. There's like this weird thing that happens with video games where either you have way too much or something or not enough of something. There's never a very good balance. Like there's the whole, tutorials suck in video games because everything's hand-holdy and blah, 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 where it's telling you, okay, push forward to move forward, push backwards to move backwards. And it takes like 10 minutes to get through these tutorial sequences of move forward to go forward, push A to jump. Like, no one needs that level of handholding. That is way too overbearing. That is way too much. But on the opposite end, like a From Software game, they literally don't tell you anything about basics. And Elden Ring is a little bit different. There is way more quote unquote tutorializing. It's in the form of a single pop-up screen that shows up once at the very, very, very beginning of the game and never shows up again. And I believe there is a way to look some of that stuff up, but I never found it, nor did I really care to go looking for it because it was so buried in a lot of menus. There are so many freaking menus in that game. It does not need to be that complicated. So you have the overbearing, way too much tutorialization, or the From Software approach where we built this insanely complicated game and we're not going to tell you a single thing of how something works. Like the ashes. The ashes are one of the biggest parts of that game. You summon, special creatures or characters like ashes, the fallen enemies, basically. They're summons. And they are a core part of defeating bosses and progressing through the game. And it doesn't even tell you how to get that. You have to know to go back to the very beginning portion of the game at nighttime in a single location and find a character who only shows up there at night, talk to her, and then she'll give you that stuff. I did not know that for like 10 hours in until maybe even 20 hours in. I can't remember. It was so long into the game. And I was watching videos online of, combat tips and, how to get better weapons and upgrade, because the game's not going to tell you. So you have to have YouTubers tell you. And I finally came across a video where it was like, you need ashes. Oh, go get this ash. And I was like, what is an ash? So I typed it into YouTube and searched for it and watched a couple of videos. And there's one video that said, here is how you get ashes. And I was floored. I was like, wait, what? So there is definitely a aspect of not hand-holding, which is nice, but at the same time, you need to tell your players core mechanics of the game that they might not know off the bat. And I'm not talking about movement, because no one needs that. If you have a controller, what are you going to do with a controller? You're not going to just sit there and not touch anything. You're going to touch stuff, you're going to press buttons, and you're going to manually just automatically find out how the game works and what buttons do what. But for super complex type of stuff, like those ashes and summons and other things, unless you know how to do it or where to get it and what they do, you're never going to find out on your own. So it's a little ridiculous, but it's not that big of a deal. That's just one of those things I wanted to talk about. But when I got to the ending of the game, so you burn this big Erd tree, and I was really excited because I got throughout the game, I didn't look most stuff up. I looked some stuff up on how to get some better weapons because I had the main starter weapon and the main gear, like the all the armor and stuff from my starter character for probably about 40 hours into the game. And then I started looking up, well, what the heck do I do now? I feel like I'm not making any progress anymore. I feel like I'm not making any amount of discernible damage on these characters, and I'm getting further and further, and I'm just doing less and less, and it was just really frustrating. So that's when I started looking stuff up. But I got through most of the game on my own, which I felt really good about. And that's kind of one of those things that a lot of people talk about these games is a sense of accomplishment, which I'm sure I've talked about before on this podcast about how that really doesn't weigh too heavily on me and my liking of a game, that sense of accomplishment. Where, oh, you beat this character by studying his every single move for the last 15 hours of dying over and over and over again, and you finally beat him. I'm like, cool, it shouldn't have taken 15 hours to beat a single boss. That freaking sucks. Like, that is not something that makes me feel good when I wasted 15 hours learning a stupid boss trick only to find out there's a way to cheap out the experience and get them way quicker and then move on with the rest of the game. The bosses in that game are the least fun part of the entire game. I wish that they had like 1 or 2 bosses instead of like the 50 that they have, because they are not fun. The enjoyment for me, this is all personal experience, but for me, the Elden Ring experience was exploration, learning the world and where everything is and coming across unique and interesting stuff. Now, the world itself is definitely interesting, but kind of in a very dark and bleak way. I'd much rather have a nice fantasy setting, like the beginning opening part of the game where you have everything green and orange and all this stuff. But when you get deeper in and everything's like a volcano or just burned ground and ashes and smoke and all that stuff, like, dark and dreary stuff, that doesn't interest me as much. But the exploration is such a key factor into what made Elden Ring enjoyable for me. There was very little parts of where boss fights were fun, and the last section, kind of to get to my point, is where I had a real problem with the game. I think the game just crapped out at the end. I hated the last 5-ish hours, 5 to 10 hours of that game. Like, absolutely hated it. It ruined it didn't ruin, but it really soured me on that game, the last 5 to 10 hours of that game, because what happens is your character is basically trying to become Elden Lord, whatever that means, basically king, right? And you progress through this huge, gigantic map, and you come to this area where there's this giant fire troll at the top of a volcano where you need to get to. And that fight was actually pretty fun for the most part. Like every freaking boss fight I've ever done in any video game, I can usually almost beat the boss in a single first try. And then I die and I try and do it again, same, thing. And I get a quarter of the way where I was. And then I die and try again. And then I die and try again. And then I die and try again for about an hour and a half until I finally fight and beat the boss. And that's kind of what happened. It wasn't that long, but it really sucks when you're at this boss area. You fight this boss for what feels like an hour. It's usually about 5 to 10 minutes, whatever. But that's a long boss fight to only die and then have to respawn. Now, the loading times, especially on PC, aren't bad at all. I think I timed it at 6 seconds. 6 seconds for a spawn is not bad. But you spawn so far away. It's like half a minute to a minute just to get back to where you were, just to get back to that boss fight. That is what kills my momentum and enjoyment. If I could get right back into the fight, I would enjoy it a whole lot more. Spawn me right before I walk in through that stupid fog door. Spawn me right before I start the fight so that if I feel way too underpowered, like the Margit boss fight, I could go somewhere else. But if you spawn me so far away, it makes me not want to attempt that boss again, especially if it's the 30th or 40th time. That's just way too much running around, spawning my horse, riding over there, going across this bridge, getting through the fog door, and then finding the boss and aggroing him, and then getting to the boss fight. That's so much prep work just to get to where I just was. And, a lot of people will go, well, that's part of the experience, or that makes it the amount of effort that you have to put in makes the experience what it is. And yeah, to some extent, but man, wouldn't it be way more enjoyable if you could just get right back into the boss fight and skip that first minute of running around getting to where you just were? This is what pisses me off about these From Software games, is some of the design choices are just stupid and bad. They're bad design choices. I'm not saying I need you to spawn me right in front of the boss with the same health and all that stuff, and not lose souls, and not and have all this stuff handed me on a silver platter, but make it so that I can run right to the boss within 5 seconds and start the boss fight if I want to, or 5 to 10 seconds at most. There is one part in the last section of the game where once you burn down this L tree, so you fight the fire troll, you get to the top of a volcano and you say, I want to burn the L tree. So you do that, big old cutscene happens, like literally the second and only cutscene in the game. And then you burn down the L tree, it creates a lot of chaos, and then you finally go to the last area of the game. And it's like way off on the map, like it's its own separate area that you have to be teleported to. And it's a really cool location. It's basically like this floating, crumbled city that is completely destroyed and floating in the atmosphere, and there's tons of tornadoes swirling all around it. It looks really cool. It looks like the end of a crazy epic movie or something. But what happens with this is that I want to be able to just get to the boss, and there's a boss in that area, in that last section, that actually does what I'm talking about, where it spawns you within 5 to 8 seconds from the boss fight. And doing that boss fight, I'll get into it in a second, but getting to that boss fight and just retrying over and over really, really quickly and going, oh man, I almost had him. Oh man, I almost had him. That's so much more easily enjoyable for me and made me feel ready and equipped to just get right back in the fight. And that's one of the things, like, you're not getting right back in the fight most of the time. And it's like, well, my mind starts to wander, or I start thinking, well, should I get more prepared? Do I need to craft more stuff? Do I need to go and get better weapons? Do I need to swap out my weapons? And it just creates way more confusion and takes way longer. So the last section of the game just sucks because it is at the very end, boss rush mode. And I hate boss rush modes. I don't want to fight a boss and then immediately go into another boss. And there are multiple bosses in this area where you fight a boss, and then you fight another 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 boss, and then you walk a couple feet, and then you fight another boss. And it's too much. It is way too back-end loaded with these boss fights. And that's one of the things that I have an issue with Elden Ring, is that it is too much of a game. People talk about how big this game is. It needed to be split. It needed to have part of it when you burn the L tree. That should be that should be the end of the game. Then save the other part for a sequel, because obviously there's going to be an Elden Ring 2, and have, like, instead of having that map so big where you can spend several hundred hours and still not see everything in the game, maybe cut some of that and save it for the next game. And now, instead of one gigantic game that most people won't see half of the things in that game, you can have 2 games where most people see most of the things in the first game, and then most people see most things in the second game as well. Instead of having it spread out through this gigantic world that is really, really too expansive. In some cases, there's very rarely a case where I go, this game is too big, but this is one of those cases. It's just way too big for its own good. So that part kind of frustrated me, because I was just like, at some point, when I was getting to that other area, I just ran through a lot of the area. I didn't want to spend time in it. I wanted to finish the game. I was like, 80 plus hours into that game. I did not want to spend several dozen more hours in that game. I just wanted to finish it and move on, because that's at the time when, a game's like the new Horizon Zero Dawn game, whatever, Forbidden West was coming out, Dying Light 2, Infernax, like there were so many other games that were coming out, and it was like, man, I'm just playing Elden Ring. I like playing a single game at a time, but at some point I want to finish it and move on with my life. So I really just struggled at that very end going, when can I just finish this game, please? And I almost put it down, especially in that last section where I knew this was the last part of the game. There was nowhere else for me to go because I explored everywhere else in the game other than the subterranean areas. Like there's a top part of the map and then there's a sub part of the map. And the subterranean part of the map, man, is just, it's exhausting. And I did go through most of it, but there was just points where I'm like, dude, I don't want to be here. I want to be able to level up. I want to be able to use my souls or runes or whatever and do all that fun stuff. So I kind of skipped some portions of the bottom part of the map, but the top portion, the portion that you see for the most part of that map system, I explored pretty much everything. And then I got to this final area and I knew it was the final area. And I just stopped caring. Like every boss fight just wore me down more and more. And I was like, dude, I don't care. And that's where I was really starting to look up stuff. I was looking up how to finish this boss fight quickly and what are the tips on how to finish this boss fight, or what's the optimal way to get to the end of the game and stuff like that, because I just didn't want to explore anymore. I was so tired. I was getting burnt out, and my feeling of how enjoyable that game was starting to sour a little bit. When I spend that much time in that short amount of time with a game, if it starts dragging, my enjoyment immediately starts to decrease. And so I just spent a lot of time looking up videos when I wasn't playing of what weapon do I need to be overpowered, because I just want to start running through people. I don't want to sit there and have a 45-minute long boss battle. I want to spend 3 to 5 minutes in this boss battle, dodging, knowing what's coming, and then going through it. And this is, again, where a lot of people, in those gaming communities start, throwing hissy fits and stuff like that about, well, you're not playing it right and blah, blah, blah. And yes, there are certain ways to play a game right and wrong. I think I talked about it before when I talked about, Red Dead Redemption 2, where a lot of people were saying, this game is so slow. Well, it's designed slow. It's a Western. It's set in the late 1800s. And of course, you're not going to be flying across the map in a Dodge Viper type of speed. Your horse is going to go at the speed of a horse. You're going to walk around and you're not sprinting everywhere because people just didn't sprint everywhere. You have this massive sprawling land. You're not going to just sprint across the map in 5 minutes. So yes, there are right and wrong ways to play certain games. And where a lot of people will start getting frustrated online is when someone says, I want easy mode or whatever. And it's like, most people aren't saying they want everything easy. And I'll talk about this in just a second. But they want something balanced. And at the very end of this game, I got really, really frustrated with this one boss where I was saying that you spawn right in front of the boss room, which was really nice. It's probably, if you get through the boss fights in a manageable, easy, rough amount of time without counting death time and retries, it's about an hour left into the game. And you have like 7 bosses. It's just way too much. 7 bosses in 1 hour of gameplay is way too much. And so I got to this area and I fought this boss, but it's technically 2 bosses. And it's not just technically 2 bosses, it's technically 4 bosses because they respawn. And I was super pissed off because what happened was I got the proper ashes for this game. Like I said, at the very end of the game, I started looking up a lot of like how-tos and what are the OP type of or overpowered type of power-ups and ashes and weapons and gear and all this stuff. And I started going exploring, grabbing them all and, hoarding everything so that I can build out my character to be super overpowered so I can just finish the game and move on with my life. But there was an update with that game where they nerfed a lot of stuff. And I've never been into the created lingo for a lot of games. I hate most of it because it either sounds stupid or it's just a bunch of acronyms, and most of those acronyms clash with other acronyms too. So it's the same acronym for like 17 different meanings. So when someone says they nerf something, they basically mean that they ruined it. So there was this ash that I learned about and got the night before, and it was called the Mimic Ash. And the Mimic Ash basically creates a copy or clone of your character, a ghost copy of your character with all the same weapons, abilities, power-ups, and gear that you have. So it's another basically copy of your character exactly. And I got that ash, and it was called overpowered because it's basically you. So if you create an overpowered character, your mimic ash or your copy or clone is overpowered as well. And the AI of that character will just run and destroy these bosses whenever you summon it. So you can literally just sit back and watch your copy, kill everything and do all the moves and know the logic and animations of these bosses and just take the boss out very quickly. With that new, I think it was 1.03 update, they nerfed it. So they ruined it. They balanced it out and made it really, really less overpowered. And in my case, and I started going online and kind of asking questions because I saw that this mimic ash that I got the night before wasn't doing anything. It was just standing there and then getting destroyed by these bosses. My character was pretty overpowered. It was getting destroyed by bosses who would just stand there like a dumb idiot rock and get murdered within 5 seconds. Like, I'd summon it, use up half of my health, so I'd regen, I'd walk to the corner, I'd try and watch it, and it would just stand there, get hit over and over, and then die within 5 seconds. And I did this over and over, and then I went to a different area, I spawned into a different area to see, maybe it's just broken or something, and it would just do the same thing over and over again. And I was like, wow, I spent like an hour trying to accomplish this goal of getting this, overpowered ash, and I loaded it up, and nothing happened. So I went online, found out the update kind of nerfed it and broke it and just destroyed the whole purpose of that ash. Everyone's like, yeah, don't even use it, it's worthless. Or some people were like, yeah, it's definitely nerfed, but it's not, it's still worth using. It's still the best ash in the game. And that was not my experience at all. Like, literally, the starter ash was way more functional than the super overpowered mimic one. That was just a bummer. So that kind of soured me on that. And then, like I said, that boss fight, you have not just one boss, but 2 bosses combined that you're fighting at the same time, which is really hard. They're very, very difficult. They have crazy, infinite reaching hits and attacks that will destroy you within a single hit. And I got so tired of it. I got one down and I started finding the other one. I'm like, you know what? I can just run around and slowly chip away at his health. I can do this. And then that boss that I fought that I killed respawned. So I had to defeat the one character a second time, and then the same thing happens again. And it's just like, and I looked it up, and I looked up a bunch of like how-tos to defeat the boss and stuff. And I was like, dude, this freaking sucks. This ruined. Like, I just stopped there for the night, and I was like, I'm done. I'm not playing this game anymore. This is unfun. I haven't been having fun for hours, and this is unfair. And so I looked online how to defeat him. I finally, got all the stuff to defeat him. And I went through and finished the game. And it was one of the worst gaming experiences. Like, I did not have fun with the ending of that game at all. I was pissed off the entire time. I didn't have any enjoyment or fun at it. I was just going, get me through, let me see the credits so that I can be done with this stupid game. I don't want to ever play it again. Like, that's how much and how bad the last section of Elden Ring is. It ruined so much enjoyment for me. Now, will I ever go back to that game? Maybe. There's so much stuff that I didn't see still, probably, and there's definitely a lot of sub bosses and bosses around the world and stuff that I could do, but there's so many other games to play. So I finally finished Elden Ring, and I wanted something much more lighthearted. And I did try and play a game that came out around the same time as Elden Ring, which is called Tunic. And it's on Game Pass, and Tunic is basically Elden Ring or Dark Souls in its game mechanics. It's the Dark Souls combat and mechanics, but the way that it's displayed is a very cartoonish, peaceful style game where you are this little fox wearing, the Zelda tunic and stuff like that, and you got a sword, and it's very much Zelda and Dark Souls mashed together. And it even has this isometric tilt shift diorama style to it that made me feel like the Link's Awakening remake, which was really interesting. I really enjoyed that game. And there's a lot of puzzles and stuff with it. So, I went from Elden Ring to Tunic, and I played a couple hours of it, and I was like, this is really nice, but I just can't play another game like this right now. I just finished almost 100 hours of Elden Ring. I cannot go into a game very similar like that right now. So it's something that I want to get to by the end of the year for sure. It's definitely a standout. But the Dark Souls mechanics, the Elden Ring mechanics of you have stamina and you have to block and you have to just everything about those mechanics. I don't even want to get into it because I'm kind of tired talking about those types of games. But it's basically that with a very cutesy art style. And I'm not saying cutesy as in a lot of this really watered down, weird art style stuff. It's really nice. It's just something I cannot play right now. So I started looking for something different, something new, and I didn't want to spend any money because I just spent a whole ton of money on Elden Ring. So I was looking at Game Pass, and there was a snowboarding game that came out around the same time, which was called Shredders. And I was like, snowboarding. I mean, it's April. Snow's pretty much gone, but I'll take a look at a snowboarding game. And I really, really, really enjoyed Shredders. Unfortunately, the way that game is made is really weird. It's a hard recommendation for a lot of people because it feels very much like an early access indie game where it is their first game. They don't really know what they're doing, and there's a lot of weird technical issues, glitches, characters spawning in or out, character warping, very, very awkward dialogue, and pretty bad voice acting for the most part. What's really nice and interesting about Shredders, though, is that everything that I just described sounds pretty bad, but it gives this very genuine feeling. It seems like a very genuine video game from people who just love video games and want to make them, but they're not very good at it yet. This is like their first outing. It's like if I was going to make a video game and I got a bunch of my friends and buddies together and we spent a couple years working on this video game. That's how it feels like. It feels like someone who really wanted to make a good video game and they just did not meet that bar of good, but they made something and it was really fun and enjoyable. And I'm a big snowboarding fan. I love snowboarding video games. And it was really, really interesting to be able to see this type of gameplay style. Like it's a weird game. It's semi-open world. So you get dropped into a part of the map and you can go wherever you want, but there is a story mode that you can follow. And when you go to a mission, you start a story. It says, all right, cool. Like here's the cutscene, and then drops you back into the open world close to where the mission start is. And you have to snowboard your way to that mission start. You could go off the beaten path and go do something else, but like you have like a 30-second to a couple minutes of, snowboarding around, getting to the mission point, and then you do the mission, which is usually do some tricks here, do some tricks there, go to this part of the map, go to that part of the map, whatever it is. But the cutscenes tie everything together. Loosely, it's a very loose story about these two snowboarders that are completely 100% covered in gear. So you don't see your character's face. You can semi-create your character. You can swap out clothing and boards and gear and all that fun stuff, but you cannot see your character's face. And they are so puffy with their snowboarding jackets that you have to you have to guess at your character's gender because you just can't see anything. You can't see if you're a guy or a girl. And what's really weird about this game is that your character doesn't talk. It's a mute, and your buddy. So you are a two-person buddy system, YouTubers. You are a YouTube channel called Shreddin, and you're sitting there trying to make a YouTube video on this mountain, and you crash through some poles or a sign or something like that. And one of the park employees basically notices you and notices that you're filming. And they're like, well, maybe we can use them to kind of hype some stuff up as like a cheap monetary marketing team. And so this girl, I think her name's Elisa, the mountain character, the mountain employee, sorry. The mountain employee, Lisa, basically employs you to make YouTube hype videos for the mountain and all the upcoming events. And so you get free reign of the mountain and a guide and a tour of everything. And so it's like a win-win situation for both of these two parties. You're part of that YouTube channel, Shredageddon, but Scotty is the other part. He's your partner, and he is the one that does all of the talking. You literally should not even exist. The only reason your character exists is because someone needs to be filming and someone needs to be doing the trick. So there has to be two people, but your character is literally non-existent in pretty much every cutscene. They don't say a word. Nothing about what you do in the game matters as a character. It's all Scotty. It's all Lisa. It's all the other characters that you meet up and do stuff with. You should just be playing as Scotty. And the other part of Shredageddon should be a tripod, because that's pretty much everything else. Your character doesn't matter at all. And it was so weird to try and make my character look cool and, care about my character when you could take your character out of the game completely and it wouldn't matter, and just swap out your other character, Scotty, as the main character for like all the actual gameplay elements. Nothing would matter with your character. Him being gone would mean nothing. So it's a little weird and a little awkward, but there's heart to that game that I really appreciated and really enjoyed. Some of the controls of the game too were really hard to get into, because my snowboarding game of choice is SSX. Now, a lot of people will love and talk about, anytime you mention SSX or a snowboarding game, they talk about the second game in the SSX series, which is SSX Tricky, which I don't know why people still talk about that game over SSX 3, which is infinitely better on every single aspect. I have no idea why people think about SSX Tricky over SSX 3 or On Tour or even the 2012 SSX game. Like, Tricky is just not that great of a game. It's a better game than the original SSX for sure, and the Tricky system was great, and yes, they had the Run DMC song, but that's about it. When you look at SSX Tricky versus SSX 3, 3 is hands down better. So I don't know why people bring that game up, but that's the game series that I fell in love with. I also grew up playing Cool Boarders and stuff like that too, and 1080 snowboarding. So I've got all these kind of control schemes for snowboarding games in the back of my mind whenever I pick up a new one. The muscle memory kind of comes back from my childhood of playing those games. So when I picked up and tried to do tricks, the controls took a little bit of getting used to because you have to grab with the bumpers and you also have spin and flip tricks with the analog system, the analog controls. And so it took a while to really understand how to do rotations in the air and spins and flips. But once I got it down pretty good. But later on, it's like, oh, do a forward, backward, backside 360 1080 rodeo. And it's like, I don't know how to do that. And so I'm just kind of doing stuff and hoping I pull it off. And if I really dedicated myself to maybe an hour and a half of properly sitting down and training with the controls of that game and just creating a spawn point at the top of a slope and just doing tricks over and over and over and over and over again, I would get it. But the game wasn't that great, so it wasn't worth the time investing, and it wasn't really interesting enough for me to really invest the time into learning the controls and getting it down. Just messing around, button mashing was good enough to get through that game. It's only a couple hours long anyways. Like, I sat down with the game and my wife was watching me play it after I finished Elden Ring. And she was like, what's this game? And I started just going through it. And when you do a mission, you got 1, 2, or 3 stars that you can get. And it's kind of like when we sat down and played Overcooked or Moving Out, where you'd have the 1, 2, or 3. You just barely got by and you got 1 star. You did pretty good, but you could do better and you got 2 stars, or you did fantastic. You did everything you needed to do. You got 3 stars. So when she sits down and watches me play and I just run through a game where I'm like, yeah, good enough, 1 star. She's like, aren't you going to do it again? Wait, you didn't get all 3 stars. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. And she's like, why? Don't you want to play the game? I'm like, yeah, I'm playing the game, but I only need 1 star to progress the mission. I don't need more than 1, but she is the one who kind of pushed me to get 3 stars and retry the stuff. And I actually enjoyed it for the most part too. Whenever I would get 2 stars and go, you know what? I actually enjoyed that mission. I'll do it again. And then there was some missions where I was just like, dude, I did not like that. It wasn't fun. It's like a trailing mission in the Assassin's Creed or the early Assassin's Creed games where you just don't want to do it. You don't have fun with that mission style. You just want to get through it. So you don't care if you get 1 star or 3 stars. You just want to progress. And that's kind of how I felt. There was a couple of them where I tried to do it, or to get 3 stars, it was pull off these 4 different tricks that are all really hard to pull off, and I can't guarantee it. It's like when I was playing Skate and it was like, do the 360 varial flip. It's like, I can't do that on command. No matter how many times I tried, I cannot get that one trick to stick. And it's not like Flatland, like a skateboarding game where you can just do the trick over and over and over and you can do 40 versions of that and try 40 times in 1 minute. It's like, you have to wait for the jump. You have to spawn. You have to retry. You have to miss the mission objective and then retry it. So at some point with the ones that I wasn't having fun with, or the ones that were just way too difficult to really get down unless I spent the time to learn the controls all the way through and really refine them, I just went with the 1 or 2 stars that I got. But I tried to get 3 stars every single time. If I didn't and I wanted to and enjoyed the mission style, then I would retry and try to get 3 stars. But man, Shredders is such a fun game. It's on Game Pass, so if you like snowboarding games, if you like games with heart but are not fully technically great, that are more early access or indie developed, give Shredders a try, man. It's a really fun game, even though it's not the best game out of everything that's come out so far. All right. So that's pretty much what I've been playing. I haven't been really spending too much more time. Our new game of the month for April is Cyberpunk 2077 on our Couch Money Discord. And it's kind of a bummer because I think a lot of people are still playing Elden Ring. I know a few people are still playing Elden Ring, so they didn't really even vote. And we had kind of a weird thing with April's game because so many people were still playing Elden Ring. They were like, I'm not going to be able to finish it. And I said, it doesn't matter. Game of the month is just so that everyone can kind of play a single game and talk about it, so that we're not having 70 different discussions. Well, I'm playing this game, I'm playing that game, I'm playing this game. It's like you can play what you want, but if you want to have a discussion on a single game and everyone's kind of playing it all at the same time, that's our game of the month. So everyone's still talking in the Elden Ring Discord channel, but we're doing Cyberpunk, and I feel like I'm the only one playing it and posting my opinions. A couple people haven't played it yet. Some people have played it already, and so they're like, and it was a toss-up between the Guardians of the Galaxy game and Cyberpunk. And the only reason I kind of wanted to, or that I chose, and I'm kind of the deciding factor, but I try to leave it up to a vote, but there was really no good voting for this one. The reason why I chose Cyberpunk over Guardians is that I already played Guardians, and a couple other people already played Guardians. It's a shorter game than something like Elden Ring. It took me, I think, 17 hours to get through Guardians, and it only came out several months ago. It came out in October of 2021, whereas Cyberpunk has been out for over a year. It came out in December of 2020, so over a year has passed since Cyberpunk, and they just did a whole big old update. So that was my deciding factor of why I wanted to do Cyberpunk. And also, they just released a VR update for it, and holy crap, the VR is actually really cool. The only issue is that it's such a demanding game, and unfortunately not super greatly optimized too, that VR just, you have to drop everything to low settings. I think they just came out with an update to make it medium settings, which I might try tonight. But I've been playing Cyberpunk. I'm really, really, really enjoying Cyberpunk. Much more than I thought I was. When the game first was originally announced, I was not into it at all. I did not care about Cyberpunk. I did not like the style of Cyberpunk at all. But it was CD Projekt Red. They made the Witcher games. Of course I'm going to play it. But it took me a while to get into it. When it first came out, the day before we set out for our drive across the country, it came out. So I spent 6 hours with that game and then dropped it to go drive across the country. And that's when we also moved and everything too. So I did not get to it until... I put it down after 6 hours and didn't get back to it until a couple weeks ago. And in that time, obviously the whole it's broken thing and all this other extra stuff going on with Cyberpunk, I didn't really know the story. I didn't know why Keanu Reeves was in it, all this stuff. But now that I'm playing it and going through the missions, I really, really, really like the story. I think the whole story of Johnny Silverhand is actually really interesting. And the reason why is because it totally subverted my expectations of the game. You're this character V, and you have a friend, and you're basically kind of like a mercenary. You do jobs for people, whatever it is, and usually it involves killing people and smuggling stuff and doing all this stuff. That's your character. In the midst of one of these missions, you have to steal something from a very, very powerful person. So you sneak your way in and you steal the thing. And in the midst of trying to leave, you get caught in this like very close quarters, shut up and hide type of situation. And stuff goes completely sideways. And the thing that you stole is basically like this brain chip. So you put it in your brain because it's starting to defect, and stuff happens to where the chip kind of overtakes part of your mind. And Johnny Silverhand, Keanu Reeves' character, is basically implanted into your brain and starts taking over. So you are a multiple split personality character at that point. So you see him show up in the world, but you are the only one who sees him because he's in your mind. So Johnny Silverhand, blips into existence and starts talking about the character that you're talking to. Like you're talking to, this guy who is trying to say, hey, I need you to help me with a job. And Johnny Silverhand blips into existence and says, I don't trust him. Don't talk to him. He's an idiot. We need to figure out what's going on with me first. Why don't you smoke a cigarette? I need a cigarette. I used to smoke cigarettes and now I'm dead inside your mind and I need you to smoke a cigarette. Like all this type of like internal monologue, but you are vocalizing it out and he's vocalizing it to you, but it's all happening within your mind. It's really, really cool. I love it. And then just like with The Witcher 3, there's so many side characters and all the side stuff and all the side missions are really, really well scripted, written extremely well. The characters are memorable. They're enjoyable to interact with and talk to. I just finished this campaign with a character called Pan Am. Is this one chick who basically was with this gang and she split off because she didn't like how things were going. And then she kind of joins up with me to do a mission. Things go sideways with that mission, like everything does in that game. And you have to employ the help of her old, rat pack, basically, her group of nomads. And like you get to see the character interactions of why she left and, why the people who are part of her group are mad at her, but also want her back because everyone's family. And it's so well written and extremely well voice acted too. Everyone's acting in it is amazing. It's superb. It is such a bummer that it is still a technical nightmare. And I don't want to see, I keep seeing people talk about video games as the graphics are really good, but the technical issue. And when you talk about technical issues, there's got to be more words to describe that than just technical. But it really is a lot of graphical glitching in the programming of the game where things don't interact the way that they should. There are definitely a lot of times in the last couple of days where I've been in firefights, shootouts, where I see a character warp back and forth really rapidly. Like they're trying to run across the other side of the room and take cover, but it happens almost instantaneously. So they're, warping in and out of areas and everything's just a little bit glitchy. And it's like, man, this is a AAA type of game experience. Like The Witcher 3 was so well lauded. And I know when that game came out, it was still a technical issue. There's a lot of issues with that game. I didn't personally see a whole lot of them at the start. I was playing on PC. Same thing with Cyberpunk. Yes, there was a couple characters when I first started playing back in December of 2020 that were T-posing, or the car system was really weird and like people were getting into accidents all the time. And that still does happen. It's really funny to just hear this big old car crash and see people just dead in their cars and stuff. That game feels like, why did it get released this way? It really shouldn't have. It needed more time, and they've had over a year to finish and finalize it up, but they're also working on older systems. It should never have been released on older systems. It's a modern quote unquote next gen game and all this stuff, but obviously they can't just leave people out to dry. And also, you still can't find those systems right now. You still can't find a PS5 at all. I've tried. I'm starting to be able to see the Xbox Series X, and we have a Series S at this point. I got it for my wife for Christmas. But I have a really good gaming PC, and luckily I actually found a graphics card too, which was unbelievable. I was so happy that I finally was able to get that. But that's neither here nor there. Cyberpunk is a really fun game. It is still has a lot of technical issues and glitches, but they are not game breaking. They are nothing to ruin the experience of the game. It is not like Elden Ring where it's like frustrating, where it's going to break the game somehow. It is just, ooh, this doesn't look good. So that is what I've been playing for the last month and a half or so. I started playing a little bit of SnowRunner as well. And SnowRunner was a game that came out in 2020 that I just latched onto for whatever reason. I'm not really sure even why, because it's not really my type of game, but for some reason, there's something about that series. Spin Tires, Mud Runner, and then the third one was SnowRunner. And it was in my game of the year for 2020. I just enjoyed it so much. I put like 50 plus hours into that game, and I've dumped definitely at least another 20 more into it. And so I started it up last night because I just kind of wanted to get away from I didn't want to play Cyberpunk. I like playing that at night and in VR. I didn't want to play something like Elden Ring or Tunic or anything like that. So I was looking for something else, and SnowRunners is just installed on my gaming PC, so I loaded it up really quick to test some stuff out, and then I just kind of got sucked in and started playing it. And within the first couple of, like, the half hour, 45 minutes of playing, I was like, man, this is fun, but I really wish I had better vehicles. I would get to a map, and it takes a long time to get anywhere in that game because of mud and snow. You are just dug deep, and most of that game is trying to get yourself unstuck out of mud and things like that. So I spent the time to get across the map and get to a mission objective, find out what the mission is, go to the very beginning. It's like, pick up, some wood from the lumber mill and drop it off here. Like, that's the mission style of that game. So I would get to the area where it tells me, go to the lumber mill. I go to the lumber mill and it says, all right, load up the lumber with this trailer, but I don't have the right truck for it. So I have to go get another truck, and just a whole mess. And getting across the stuff, it was like, if it was a 5-minute trek, it wouldn't be a big deal. But it's like, dude, this is like a half an hour trek to get across the map just with this truck. Now you're saying I have to go all the way back and then go all the way back again, pick the thing up, and then do it. So I started dipping my toes into the modding scene last night, and I just want to play the game and have a fun time. I want to get stuck, but I don't want to get stuck so much and go so slow that it's like every car and truck crawls in that game. And it's by design too, but at some point I'm like, man, I should have, after 70 plus hours into the game, I should have better vehicles. And I have an H2 Hummer, just like in real life, that's all tricked out with all this cool stuff in the game. And I'm like, man, if I just had the proper tires. But to find those tires, you got to go exploring. To go exploring, you have to have a truck that is capable with proper tires. It's this catch-22. So I downloaded a mod for a truck that is just really overpowered to go exploring. That's it. That's all I want to do with it, is go explore. And so I go explore, I find some upgrades and stuff like that for various missions. And then it's like, oh, get this car unstuck, do this, do that. And I'm like, man, okay. And I'm just having a blast driving around in that game. And even some of the really, really tough stuff where it's like, there was this one thing in Russia, like I'm in Russia and it's saying, go find this truck that is fallen off a cliff, and you got to repair it. So you got to take this massive tanker truck up this insanely small, winding, muddy hill that's going to take about an hour to get up, and then use that tanker truck to refill it and repair it, but you have to do it 3 times. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's insane. So what I did is I took my massive monster truck mod car, I drove all the way to the broken down thing, I winched it up and towed it out so that I could easily get my repair truck, my oil tanker truck, to go refill it and go repair it multiple times. And that was so much more enjoyable. And I got the mission done. I own that car now. And it's like, dude, this is great. Like this truck is so overpowerful that you could basically just tow something. And it took a while to tow it, but I was having a blast the entire time. I'm smiling ear to ear. Like, dude, SnowRunner's so fun. It is my weird, relaxing Zen type of game. I just enjoy that series so much. I love that game. And there's like all these season passes and all this stuff. I'm like, oh, that's just too much. I feel like I'm about 15%, maybe 20% at this point into the full game. So like getting season passes and stuff is like, that's maybe too much. I'll probably never get to that content. But the core game experience, I bought it, on Epic Game or Epic Store when it came out in 2020, and I've dropped, like I said, about 70 hours into that game, and I have a blast every time I play it. Sometimes I did load it up several months ago, and I was just like, I spent maybe about an hour with it, and I was like, man, I just don't know what I'm doing. It takes a while to relearn that game, but once you relearn it, and mods, like, it is so wonderful to have just like a good truck to go exploring. Once you understand the basic mechanics of the game, like having to get in a car and take the handbrake off before you start the engine up, before you can go, and learning how to use the gears properly, high and low gears for getting stuck, and using the winch system, and getting the right tires and the right equipment for the job that you need to do, and getting the right truck, I think, is the hardest and most difficult part of that game. If every mission said, you need this truck for this job, and it would filter out the trucks that you have in your inventory with the equipment that you need to. Say, like, spawn my, Mack truck with the high saddle trailer lift. If I could just push a button and get the truck that I own with the proper things that I own so that I can go complete this mission, I wouldn't have, the trouble that I did yesterday afternoon, where I would jump in my Hummer, drive across the map, say, all right, cool, get to the sawmill, and say, how can I do this? Oh, you don't have the proper stuff. You're not using the right truck, and you're not using the right equipment. So I went to the truck, and it just said, you don't have the proper truck. You need a big rig. So I went back to the garage. I got my big rig out. I drove it all the way back to the sawmill and tried to load up the trailer. And it's like, you don't have the proper trailer attachment. And the only way to do that is to go back to the garage, load it up with the proper trailer equipment, and then drive it back. And I was like, that's way too much. So like, that mod really, really helped me just be able to kind of learn where I need to go and what I need to do. And then I can take the proper trucks with the proper equipment to the areas. There should be a better way to do that, but whatever, it's not that big of a deal. But that's going to do it for me for the Game or Die podcast. I've been Ryan Moore. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you have any questions, you can drop it down at podcast@gameordie.net, or you could just go to gameordie.net and look at all the reviews. I wrote a review for Elden Ring, which was the longest review I've ever written, and unlike other gaming outlets who cry about doing their job and how hard and physically demanding it is to write a review, it took me about 2 hours. I did it at around 1 o'clock at night after I finished Elden Ring. I finished Elden Ring. I wrote a review. It was super long, over 3,500 words, and it took me like an hour and a half to 2 hours to write. People are a bunch of babies, and it's insane that people that have these jobs that pay super, super well to do the most basic things at a job sit there and whine and complain about it. If you don't like your job, quit. No one's holding a gun to your head, and there are thousands of people who are more qualified and better suited and will enjoy the work much more than you apparently do. So that's my little rant for today. But like I said, my name is Ryan Moore. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want, Game or Die, or you can go to gameordie.net and look all that stuff up too. And I'll see you when I see you. Thanks for listening. Bye.